My Lords, the Home Office has commissioned a multi-year independent evaluation to assess the impact of violence reduction units on the most serious forms of violence and their progress in adopting a public health approach. Recent findings have shown a statistically significant reduction in hospital admissions for violent injuries in VRU areas since funding began in 2019.
With the effects of serious violence falling on some communities far, far more than others, here in London we've had 1,000 homicides since 2016. Can the Minister tell us what work is being done by VRUs to increase the effectiveness of the money that they're allocating?
Well, my Lords, since 2019, the Home Office has provided over £43 million to develop and run the London's Violence Reduction Unit, which includes an investment of £9.5 million in 2023-24. So as part of their funding terms, all VRUs are required to deliver evidence-based approaches that are shown to deliver the most impact in steering young people away from violence. In London, the various interventions being delivered include those that the Independent Youth Endowment Fund has found to be capable of delivering the highest impact, and that includes delivery of specialist support for young people affected by violence on admission to A&E or custody suites, as well as personal support such as mentoring programs, where sport is used as a hook to attract participation.
My Lords, a major risk factor for young people's involvement in violent gangs is the lack of a father at home. So what are the violence reduction units doing to make absent fathers part of the solution? Many are still very present in their children's minds, and being estranged from ex-partners does not automatically mean that they have no sense of responsibility towards the children who have gone astray. How are VRUs harnessing and encouraging that responsibility?
My Lords, the violence reduction units deliver a range of preventative work with and for communities, as I've outlined in the previous two answers to the Noble Lord Bailey. That can include families, which of course obviously involves fathers, as well as young people, and this includes a wide range of approaches, including mentoring and trusted adult programs, or intensive behavioural therapies, and, as I mentioned earlier, sports-based diversionary activities. In London in particular, the VRU's My Ends programme provides community leaders with resources to enhance violence prevention measures in their areas. And in addition, the Young People's Action Group, which is made up of young people from across London, works alongside the VRU to ensure that the voices of young people do influence policy and funding decisions.
Lords, obviously.
A 2014 Scottish study by Professor John Crichton found that the kitchen knife was the most commonly used weapon. The author suggested that the introduction of knives without points as an effective public health strategy might positively affect the rate of death and serious injury. I quote, "It would not be necessary to enforce an absolute ban on long-pointed kitchen knives, but simply to limit availability, thereby making a lethal weapon less likely to be at hand in the context of unplanned violence." Is this something that VRUs are taking forward and that the government would support?
Well, my Lords, I think the Noble Lady raises a very interesting point, and of course we keep all knife legislation under review. Noble Lords will be aware that recent moves have been made to ban, for example, zombie-style knives and machetes. Secondary legislation was laid in January. Guidance will be available from the 26th of June, and the ban will come into effect on the 24th of September. But I will ensure that all forms of knives are kept very closely under review, particularly in view of patterns of use.
My Lords, obviously large urban areas like London have particular problems, and there is, I would argue, a lot more crime. Is there any comparative assessments being done so that each VRU can learn from others in all sorts of ways?
Yes, again, I think the Noble Lady raises a very good point. She's right, of course, that London does have particular problems in this area, and the activities of certain violence reduction units have absolutely affected and influenced the way that the whole programme has been established across England and Wales, and indeed taking a lot of the lead from Scotland.
My Lords, knife crime is up by 70% since 2015, and according to the YMCA, youth services were cut by 71% in the decade after 2010. Does the Noble Lord think these two statistics are linked? And does he also believe that building on the work of the VRUs, local youth services should be introduced and backed in a way to try and prevent further knife crime?
Well, on the Noble Lord's latter point, I agree, which is one of the reasons why the Home Office has invested £200 million into the Youth Endowment Fund, to which I've already referred. As regards knife crime across the country, actually the rise is driven largely by the situation in London. For police recorded offences involving knives or sharp instruments, there was a 5% increase year on year nationally, but the increase in London was 22%, and if London was taken out of those figures, the natural trend would be a 1% reduction.
Violence reduction units can definitely reduce knife crime. It's been shown time and time again. But in order for them to be able to do their job properly, they need long-term funding, and they're not being provided with long-term funding. The government's 3-year funding model runs out next year, and there's great anxiety about what's going to come next. Will the government reconsider its current funding model and provide the sort of long-term funding that these units, which are so desperately needed, require in order to do the job they were set up for?
Well, as I've already outlined, we've already committed over £110 million since 2019 across the country. But of course we want to see the VRUs continuing to operate beyond the end of 2025. By that time, though, they will have received investment for 6 years, so we would encourage VRUs to become financially sustainable organisations. We will, of course, support them to obtain matched funding and partnership buy-in, but future funding beyond 2025 will be dependent on the needs of the VRUs and the outcome of future spending reviews.
Can the Noble Lord the Minister say how many of the VRUs include domestic and gender-based violence within their definition of serious violence? And does he agree that artificially separating public violence, street violence, from home violence, private violence in the home, ignores the links between the two, not least the impact on young people's future behaviour through what they might learn is normal?
Well, again, I think the Noble Lady raises a very good point. I actually think it's important to collect the statistics as accurately and as granular, I'm not sure I can know the right word for that, in as granular a way as possible. So I would perhaps mildly dispute the second part of the question. However, I do think we need to look at the way violence occurs in the round. So I think the Noble Lady raises a very good point indeed.
It's critical to rebuild trust from these communities and public services who are so affected by violence if violence reduction units are to be successful. This is obviously possible, but it is very challenging. Can I ask what steps are being taken to evaluate successful measures to rebuild trust and to share those between violence reduction units so that this can be done effectively?
Yes, I thank my noble friend for that question. Part of all of the funding for VRUs has to be allocated towards evaluation, but independent evaluation of the programme does show that alongside the GRIP, which we've talked about before from this dispatch box, there are serious violent hotspot programmes. It's putting additional highly visible police patrols into key locations. But the VRU programme is having a statistically significant positive effect, as I referenced earlier. So an estimated 3,220 hospital admissions for violent injury have been avoided since funding began in 2019.
Challenge the Minister, who suggested that in the future VRUs will be dependent on match funding and non-governmental sources of money. Surely violence reduction and protection of our young people is a core activity, and it's entirely right that this should be fully funded by the taxpayer. Other monies offer add-ons and extras. This surely is not an add-on and extra.
I wasn't making the case that it was an add-on or an extra. I was saying that future funding beyond 2025 will be dependent on the needs of the VRUs and the outcome of future spending reviews, and of course the evaluation that is already underway.
Isn't the increase a direct consequence of the cuts in public services, for example in local governments, in the youth service and in the police that used to make visits to schools, which in many police authorities are going to stop doing completely now? Doesn't the government need to understand that its cuts for over 13 years have had a dramatic effect on this issue?
My Lords, I referenced earlier that the funding, there is some new funding actually. The London Metropolitan Police will receive an additional, for example, £8.14 million this year, and the City of London is going to receive another £1 million for additional visible patrols in serious violence and antisocial behaviour hotspots. So the funding supports the delivery of a combination of regular high visibility patrols in the streets and neighbourhoods, experiencing the highest volumes of serious violence and or antisocial behaviour. I would also remind noble lords that there are more policemen currently in this country than ever before. The Metropolitan Police has 35,000 currently. They could have had more. The budget was available. They were unable to recruit up to the budget, which is a shame because it obviously cost them some resource. And the government has delivered on its police uplift programme.